Hey there, Math 112 fans. Somebody's asking about this question. They're confused by the fact that in this question, all I did was plug in 0 for h in my solutions, and I said this is the answer. Now, this was a problem, I'm sure, when I wrote this. I was trying to simplify the process and just check a student's understanding. So I'm certain when I wrote this question, I wasn't trying to confuse people. I was trying to make it easier. I was just trying to show the last step. Normally in these problems, you have a lot of work to do, right? You got to do all the functional notation stuff. So I'm going to explain and do a quick review because this is built off of some foundational questions. But just a reminder that in a typical question, which you sort of know is coming, I've told you it's going to be on page 2 of the test, I'll give you something like this. I'll ask you to simplify this, and that's going to look like the following. So you'd have 5. So this is from a different exam, winter 2019. You would have this. Minus 3 x plus h squared plus 1. I'll talk about that graph below in just a moment. And then you'll have minus, and you'll write f of x. So it'll be x minus 3x squared plus 1. And then you're going to divide everything by h. And then you're going to do a bunch of simplifying. And when you're done, you'll get a nice little expression. And then you'll plug in h equals 0, and that will give you the derivative. So what were they doing in this question? They were saying, assume someone's already told you all that, and you're down to the very last step. Do you understand that you're at the last step and you can just plug in 0? So again, when I wrote that question, but let's review the ideas first. Let's go to a simpler function so the algebra is not quite so bad. Let's go with the function we started the term with, which was y equals x squared. I've graphed that. That's that parabola. The slope of this little orange line you can see here is what we call a secant line. And just a reminder about a few things. I'll draw them here. I'm going to label a couple pieces. This is just an opportunity for us to recap what's going on. In fact, I'll grab it just for a second so we can label it. Yeah, this is those foundational ideas. This is where calculus comes from, so I feel like it's not bad to do a full review here again. Here's my function. So I'm going to label a couple things on there. So if this is x, let's just label it x for a second. Then this height you should know is the height of the function. It's f of x. Let's call this f of x. The height is f of x. In this case, it's x squared. So this point, if you wanted to label it, is x f of x. I know it's a bit of notation, but that's just saying if you give me a number, if it's 3, it's going to be 3 squared. If it's 4, it's going to be 4 squared. That's what we mean by functional notation. Let me move that up a little bit. Sorry, we're catching this, but it doesn't matter. Okay, so now assume I go forward a little bit to another point. We'll call that h. And this is x plus h, and then we plug that into the function. So this is f of x plus h. Now I have 2 points. Why do we do this? We do this because you need 2 points to find the slope. And the slope is going to be rise over run. So that's where that all came from, if you've forgotten. And when you do rise over run, the top is going to be the y value at the second point minus the y value at the first point divided by the x value at the second point minus the x value at the first point. And that's what gives you this thing we call the difference quotient. And that represents the slope of that secant line, or that orange line you see there. We don't really care about that line in calculus. What we care is what happens when h gets closer to 0. So here you go. This is like h equals 1. I'm going to make it smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. So if we can find a formula for that slope and then let h get closer and closer to 0, the problem is the formula I have right now, it vanishes at 0. So you have to simplify the formula first. When you simplify the formula, it gives you the derivative, and then you can graph it. Let's do that on this simple example. So in this example, let's do it with the picture too. I'm going to get rid of my screen for a second. So in our example with x squared, this would be x plus h squared. This would be x squared. And if I did rise over run, it's going to be x plus h squared. That's the y value at the second point. And then you'd have an h on the bottom. So what we did this one in class. You would expand plus 2xh. And we had to review some algebra in order to be able to do that. And then we canceled this. And then we canceled one of the h's. And we were left with 2x plus h. What that means is that's the slope of the secant. So I'm going to label it here. I'll move my head over a little bit. So that's it. So at the end of all this, we started with this function. We got the general formula for the slope of that orange line. And then we'd like to know what happens when h is 0. And when we replaced h with 0, we got 2x. And we called that the derivative. Okay, that was the process. Very likely on the test, I'm going to ask you to do the full process, meaning I'm going to give you this and ask you to simplify this on page 2 of the test. At the end of the problem, you're going to have something that has an h in it. If you then replace h with 0, you should get the same thing as the derivative. Okay? That doesn't mean that's a shortcut. You still have to get the formula. I'm going to ask for that piece. So what was happening in this problem? This problem said, assume I've already done all of that work, and I am just telling you the very last step, which is right here. Can you then tell me the derivative? So I think what confused people is it really is that short. If someone has done all the work for you and simplified all the way to the end, in fact, let's do it again. Let's erase everything now that I just did. Erase all of that I just did. All the explanation. And let's say the following. Assume I give you a function, but I'm not going to tell you what it is. Assume that after you've done all the f of x plus h minus f of x over h stuff, you get down to 2x plus h. What's the derivative? That's what the question's asking. And it's 2x. We know that. We've seen it lots of times. So this is 2x. That's what this question was asking on this test. It was saying, assume someone's already given you this. So again, I've told you I'm not going to ask that, but that actually would be an easier question. But I wanted to clarify because somebody was asking about it. I am going to ask you something about what's on the right. If you need practice with that, I do have a review video where I do a couple of these, I think including that one. But mostly the challenge is your algebra skills, which is can you expand this? Can you expand this? Can you cancel? All that same stuff. All right.